today's class is Obstacles on the Path of Devotional Service. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes, which were tightly closed, with the blazing torchlight of knowledge. When will Srila Rupa Goswami, who has established the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya in this world, give me the shelter of his lotus feet? We are meditating on the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami, because Srila Rupa Goswami has written a very nice book called the Sri Upadeshamrita, which is the basis of today's talk. Srila Prabhupada translated this book as the Nectar of Instruction in 1975. It was originally written in the Sanskrit language by Srila Rupa Goswami, who is the greatest genius, spiritual genius of medieval India. This book was written for beginners on the path of devotional service. And it's a very practical a very practical analysis of all the basic tenets of spiritual life. There's 11 verses, and it covers such important topics as how to choose a guru, how to practice Bhakti yoga, things to do and things not to do, where to live, ways of exchanging spiritual affection, etc. You may recall my last class was that final topic that I just mentioned, exchange of friendly relationships in Krishna consciousness. Today's topic is, as I said, obstacles on the path of Bhakti yoga. That is lesson number 2 from the book. And lesson number 2 describes 6 obstacles that one may encounter while practicing the method known as Bhakti Yoga, or loving devotional service to Krishna. The path of Bhakti is a journey. It's a journey, and when you begin any sort of journey, you need to be prepared to know what could go wrong. Have you put petrol in the car? Are the tires fully aired up? Did you bring everything? Did you turn off the stove? Did you lock the door? There needs to be planning. And when you begin the journey of devotional service, because it's unfamiliar terrain, one has to watch out for things like wrong turns on the path of devotional service, accidents that may happen, distractions. We may get lost. We may get robbed, mugged. We may get attacked by pirates or criminals, wild animals, things like that. Or we may just get completely lost. So while we take up the path of devotional service, we should take guidance from those persons who have already taken the journey themselves, or who are well advanced on the path. Valuable assistance is required, and this book, The Nectar of Instruction, is valuable assistance for that journey. You may ask, if the path of devotional service is so great, why should there be any obstacles on it at all? Well, there's no fault in the process of Krishna consciousness, but we have many faults. We are what's known as conditioned souls. We have bad habits from this life. We have bad habits from previous lives. And so it is our lacking that can create the problems. Plus, the material world itself is always putting up problems. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that this world is known as Dukkalayam and Ashashvatam. It's miserable. There's all sorts of problems, just like I was speaking to my friend Terry today, who's behind the camera, who explained to me that a rabbit came and ate all his vegetables last night that he was growing for Krishna. And Similar things have happened to me with slugs. That's just a very basic gardening example, but there's much more serious things that can happen in this world. There can be all sorts of disease, there can be unfortunate accidents, etc. And we may say, okay, well, look, I'm prepared to encounter the rough with the smooth. Some people argue that you wouldn't appreciate the happiness if you didn't have a little bit of misery. That's an argument which is often there. Yes, life is a bit rough, but when it's nice again, then you get to really appreciate it. My mother used to say, she used to describe it as bashing your head against the wall and then it feels so nice when you stop. But this is not a very high class sort of way of looking at the world. The world is itself miserable, and you may say, okay, I'm happy to take the rough with the smooth, but unfortunately it's also known as ashashvatam, which means it's temporary. So even you settle down into sort of a compromised situation, you compromise with Maya, take the rough with the smooth, but you can't stay. You can't even stay here. So it's not a good deal being in the material world, and devotional service means an opportunity to get out of this place completely and not have to suffer the pains of this material existence. But nevertheless, while we are in the world, obstacles will be there. And in golfing terms, they say that it's par for the course. That's a golfing term. I think I played golf twice in my life with my dad. But par for the course means that it's expected that there is going to be some handicaps on the way to your destination. You won't get holes in one every single hole you play. There's going to be sand bunkers, there's going to be lakes, and there's going to be all sorts of problems. So problems will be there. And these are all meant to test our skills, and they have to be factored into the golfing experience. So that's the golfing analogy. So sometimes Maya also tests us while we're on the path of devotional service, and she puts obstacles in our way. So that's one aspect of obstacles, and the other aspect of obstacles, as I mentioned before, is we have bad habits. We have bad habits. We started this life on the wrong foot, perhaps. If we're born in a Vaishnava family, an elevated devotional family, maybe we would not have had those bad experiences in our early life, but often most of us have had a bad start, especially those who are born in the Western countries. So Prabhupada has given us this opportunity by presenting this wonderful book, The Nectar of Instruction. I'll read today's verse for you in the Sanskrit, and this is verse number 2. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha lolyam cha sadbhir bhaktir vinasyati. And the translation of this verse is, one's devotional service is spoiled when it becomes too entangled, or should I say, one's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled, meaning the practitioner of devotional service, in the following 6 activities. So these are the 6 obstacles. Number 1, eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than are required. Obstacle number 2, over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. Number 3, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Number 4, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. Obstacle number 5, associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And number 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. So let's, in modern parlance, let's unpack these 6 points. Obstacle number 1, atyahara. In Sanskrit, this means eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. So atyahara is sort of broken into two subdivisions. Eating too much or collecting too much. Now, since it's said that devotional service, sevan mukhihi jivado, devotional service or spiritual life begins with the tongue, jiva. Ado means at the beginning. Spiritual life begins with the tongue, which is a remarkable statement, because the tongue has two functions, to taste and to vibrate. Devotional service begins with the tongue, so it makes sense that the first obstacle that one may encounter on the path of devotional service is concerning the tongue. The tongue has two functions, as I said, to taste and to vibrate. The tongue always desires to taste nice things. This is natural. Whether you are a rabbit that's chomping down on Terry's lettuce and chili plants, or whether you're a slug that's eating Kurma's lettuce and Kurma's tasty delights that are growing in the garden that will never become tasty delights because they've all been ravaged and savaged. Or whether you're a human being that likes to eat all sorts of edibles like ourselves, we like to eat prasadam. So one might say, naturally, what's wrong with eating prasadam? And there's nothing wrong with eating prasadam, of course. In fact, Prabhupada said, we have to eat foods that are offered to Krishna. And as devotees, we do that. But we can overeat. I was hearing a lecture this morning where Prabhupada said there's two things in there's a Bengali proverb. I don't know the Bengali, but he said that for a child, it's impossible to eat too much, and for an old person, it's impossible to eat too little. Impossible means it doesn't matter if you eat like that. In other words, if a child eats too much, he'll just run around. He might just go to sleep and then run around and burn it all off because his body is young and healthy. If you're an old person and you eat too much, it's very detrimental. You can get all sorts of illnesses from eating too much as you get older. So for an old person, the less you eat, the better. And for a young person, the more you eat, the better, at least for a child, so that you can develop nicely and become fit and healthy. But generally, when we're practicing yoga, it is not a good idea to eat too much. Now, when we eat too much, we have a tendency to put on weight, we become sleepy, inactive, unproductive, our health can be compromised. It is said, Srila Prabhupada in fact said that his spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, severely chastised his overweight disciples. He said that it indicated that they were eating too much and they were going to become lazy and useless. So what is the gold standard, if you like, when it comes to eating? Prabhupada said actually that the goal of bhakti is to give up eating completely. When Prabhupada was on this earth during his last 6 months, he practically ate nothing. Even in his last weeks, when he hadn't eaten for a month, he was still inquiring as to his disciples' diet. He was saying, how is the prasadam? Are you getting enough prasadam to eat? Even though Prabhupada himself had not eaten for months, just drinking a little bit of water and a little bit of fruit juice, because that was Prabhupada's wonderful mercy upon us. But Prabhupada practically said that I've given up eating, and this is the goal of bhakti. But of course, first things first. First things first. We can't artificially give up eating. Even the author, Rupa Goswami, the author of this book, he practically gave up eating also. In fact, in his the prayers to the 6 Goswamis, it is said, Nidrahara harakadi vijito chatyanta dino chayo, that the Goswamis practically gave up eating and sleeping. As I said, first things first. So Krishna sets the gold standard for the bhakti yogi as not eating too much. And he says, there is no possibility of becoming a yogi, O Arjuna, if one eats too much, or eats too little, sleeps too much, or does not sleep at all. The question is, how much is too much and how much is too little? And that needs a little bit of analysis. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was instructing Sanatana Goswami on the process of devotional service, he gave a list of 26 wonderful qualities of a devotee. And one of these 26 qualities is known as Mita Bhuk. Mita Bhuk means that the devotee only eats enough, but not too much. So what does it mean? To eat too much or too little? It depends on your body size, it depends on your body type, it depends on your capacity. There was one disciple of Srila Prabhupada in the very early days at 26 2nd Avenue. I recall that his name was Striyadish. I could be wrong, but I think that was his name. And he was well known for eating huge amounts of prasadam. The most delicious prasadam that the devotees looked forward to in those days were the hot buttered chapatis. Prabhupada trained his disciples how to cook chapatis, and there would always be a big hot pile of buttered chapatis at prasadam time, at lunchtime, dal, rice, sabji, and chapatis. And there were lots of chapatis. In fact, in the early days, Prabhupada would cook them all himself before he trained his disciples how to do it. Sometimes he would make 100 chapatis himself, Srila Prabhupada. Personally, big, fat, hot, soft chapatis, and the devotees really appreciated it, especially since they were just now coming down from eating all sorts of nasty things, and they were taking up the path of eating prasadam. So there was one disciple, Striyadish, who used to eat 20 chapatis, and he would eat more if there were. And one day there was some talk that devotees should perhaps regulate their eating, perhaps reduce their eating. And he went to Prabhupada and he was horrified. He said, Srila Prabhupada, I can't stay here if I don't get enough chapatis. And Prabhupada said, that's okay, don't worry. You can eat as many chapatis as you can digest. And for him that was 20 or more. So that's the secret, knowing how much you can digest. Actually, the yogic science, the science of Ayurveda, describes that when you eat, your stomach should be half full of food, quarter full of water, and 1/4 full of air. And that takes a little bit of expertise to know when to stop. It's a great science, and we don't always get it right. We don't always get it right. Nevertheless, Prabhupada said we should always eat prasadam. And there are two mistakes, he said, that you can make while eating prasadam. He said one of them is to eat too little, and the other is to eat too much. And if you're going to make a mistake in eating prasadam, better you eat too little than not too much. And that requires a little bit of self-control, it requires a little bit of analysis as to what we can digest. So yoga means taking control of the senses, and overeating is an obstacle. So it all begins with, as I said, what you put in your mouth, and therefore Srila Rupa Goswami has made this the first in the list of obstacles. Prabhupada explains a little more about this subject in his purport. He says that a devotee should therefore eat only enough to maintain his body and soul together. In other words, to stay alive. He should not allow his tongue unrestricted license to eat anything and everything. The Bhagavad Gita and the great acharyas or spiritual masters have prescribed certain foods for human beings, and one who eats these foods eats in the mode of goodness. These foods include grains, fruits, vegetables, milk products, and sugar, and nothing more. So, out of all of those things, of course, you can make thousands of dishes. A devotee does not eat extravagantly, except on feast days. Prabhupada encouraged us to eat more and more on special days. The devotee is interested in Krishna prasadam, food offered to the Lord, and not just to satisfy his tongue. Therefore, he does not desire anything extraordinary to eat, unquote. So that's Prabhupada's summing up of the first part of the obstacle number one. And obstacle number one contains a second part, which is as I said, accumulating too many possessions. accumulating too much. Prabhupada writes, a devotee of Krishna does not wish to accumulate a large bank balance. He simply earns as much as he requires. In the material world, everyone is very active in earning money more and more, and in increasing, eating and sleeping and gratifying his senses. Such is the mission of most people's lives, but these activities should be absent from the life of a devotee of Krishna. Now, undoubtedly, we all require possessions. We need food, we need clothing, we need money, we need a home to live in, we need some sort of shelter. Srila Rupa Goswami points out here that we should simply not collect too much than actually what we need. It's a natural principle. It's a natural principle, and if we follow it, the body will be maintained, but not excessively luxuriantly, because excess luxury distracts the mind from the yoga path. And as we can see, this over-accumulating is a huge problem in this world, especially in the Western world. Too many possessions, too many cars, too many homes, etc., etc. And that brings us to obstacle number 2. Obstacle number 2 is known as prayasa. Prayasa is described as over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. It's a natural byproduct of number 1. Srila Prabhupada describes the word prayas means endeavor. And prayasa means over-endeavor for things which are going to distract us from the path of spiritual life. Because if we over-collect, we will naturally want more and more, because it never comes to an end. You have that second car, the wife needs a car, you need a car, you've got to go to work, she's got to go to work, and then the kids grow up and they all want a car. And then where are we going to park all the cars? We have to get a bigger house to get a bigger garage so we can park all the cars. You need a bigger house, you need a bigger garage, you need more cars, you need to work harder to pay for all these things, so everyone has to work night shift and a higher paid job, a second job, and life becomes very, very stressful. People are very stressed. They have to go to work in the morning, perhaps they have to spend an hour and a half packed into the train. The first people that get in get all the seats, and then the rest of the people have to stand up, pressed together in this long, tiring train trip to the office, and then perhaps you have to get a bus from the train station to the office, and you go in and you may not like your job, you may not like the boss, and it's very hard. And you come home from work and you're exhausted, and maybe your wife's working too, and there's nothing to eat, so you've got to take something out of the freezer and you've got to stick it in the microwave and all sorts. Not a very auspicious life. And it all comes from these inflamed desires to get more and more. And it's the opposite of the principle of plain living and high thinking. So life can become a big endeavor, and life can get out of control. And if you are an aspirant transcendentalist, an aspirant devotee, this sort of life will completely throw you off kilter, as they say. Prabhupada says in this connection, in his purport to this verse, the next impediment Srila Rupa Goswami mentions is prayasa, endeavoring very hard for material things. A devotee should not be very enthusiastic about attaining any material goal. He should not be like a person who engages in fruitive activities, working hard day and night to attain material rewards. And the main thing is, when this body's over, we can't take anything with us anyway. That is that point should be remembered, as I explained before. The world is rough, and it's also temporary. So you accumulate so many things, and then you have to die. One day is your last day, and what about my library? What about my music collection? What about my beautiful cars that I've got, my vintage cars? What about my huge bank account? What about my jewelry? What about my wonderful clothes? What about my shoe collection? What about my friends? What about all over, all finished, gone, taken away in a moment? I remember In Australia, I knew this person who, I used to do these cooking classes, and I used to do it on a farm. And the person that ran the farm, he had stables, and he had extra houses being built, big storage facilities. He worked practically like 20 hours a day, like an ass, as they say. Asses work very hard. And he told me that his father passed away at around 50. And he was approaching the age of 50. And I said to him, well, you're almost the same age as your dad. Have you ever thought about what's going to happen when you go? He said, oh, not a problem. He said, I'll leave it all for my kids. He said, in fact, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing all this for my kids. And I said, okay, but what about you? Where are you going to go? Where are you going? And it's nice that you're providing for your children, but what about you? Prabhupada tells an interesting story in this connection. There was a man who worked very, very hard. He inherited a large fortune from his father, and he worked very, very hard to build up an empire, but he was very harsh and cruel and arrogant. And one day a cobbler, a shoe repair man, came knocking on his door and said, excuse me, sir, is there anyone in the house that has any shoes to be repaired? And the rich man, he became very angry. How dare you set foot on my property? Get out. Do I have any shoes? I sure have some shoes. And he took off his shoe and he started beating the cobbler over the head with his shoes and chased the cobbler away. And his sons were watching as he did this, and they were laughing at the fun, so-called fun. So later, according to destiny, the rich man died. And because of his misbehavior in this life, even though he was a rich man, in his next life, he took birth in the home of a cobbler. And he grew up repairing shoes. And one day, he approached that very same house, knocked on the door, and his sons, who were now living in the house and had grown up, answered the door. And he said, does anyone in the house have any shoes that need repairing? And of course, this was the rich man who had come back as a cobbler, coming back to his very same house. The sons remembered that their father used to chase away cobblers from the front door. So the sons picked up their shoes, hit the cobbler over the head. Little did they know that it was their own father who had returned and chased him away. This is the cruel laws of material nature. So, summing up obstacles number 1 and 2, we all need to eat, we all need to work. The secret is plain living and high thinking, and we shouldn't misuse our intelligence or waste our time in working hard like asses. We should know that if we hanker for material amenities, the latest electronic gadgets, the latest fashions, newer and better cars, and a bigger house with a pool, still our hearts will remain unsatisfied. And the desire to accumulate more and more actually develops a feverish mentality which is not conducive to Bhakti Yoga. And our whole, as I said before, our whole modern society is based upon artificial needs. And we are now seeing in today's modern scenario the terrible effects of becoming attached to artificial needs, because our artificial society is crumbling before our eyes. So how should we, as aspirant bhakti yogis, deal with this situation? Prabhupada sums this up in the purport to this verse. Jivasya tattva jigyasa. The real purpose of life is to inquire about the absolute truth. If our endeavor, prayasa, is not to inquire about the absolute truth, we will simply increase our endeavor to satisfy our artificial needs. So the spiritual aspirant should avoid mundane endeavor. In this connection, in fact, Prabhupada stresses that we, as his disciples, or grand disciples, or followers, don't study his books carefully every day and remind ourselves about the reality of life, we also will fall back into our bad habits. He said we will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from devotional service. So this is a sober reminder that we have to read Srila Prabhupada's books, study the Srimad Bhagavatam, study books like the Nectar of Instruction, the Nectar of Devotion, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita, and be well equipped to deal with the life in the material world. So obstacle number 3 of the 6 obstacles on the path of devotional service is as follows: prajalpa. Prajalpa means talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Prajalpa is sometimes known as gramya katha, or village talk. Here's a habit that we all have a tendency to slip into from time to time: ceaselessly discussing the news. He said, she said, this gossip, this scandal, this controversy, conspiracies, politics, Donald Trump, Brexit, 5G, lockdown, quarantine, these lives matter, those lives matter, sport. It's endless, and it will never end. Never end. And meanwhile, as we indulge in discussing these things every day, our time is being taken away. Prabhupada gives the example of the frog. The frogs, they like to croak at the night, in the night time. He gives a wonderful imitation of a frog. I won't hazard to imitate, but he sounds like a frog. And as the frogs croak, they simply attract the snake of death who will come to devour them. Prabhupada writes in this connection, those devoid of spiritual consciousness are interested in reading heaps of newspapers, magazines and novels, solving crossword puzzles and doing many other nonsensical things. In this fashion, simply people waste their valuable time and energy. In the Western countries, because Prabhupada noted this when he came to America, that old men retired from active life play cards, go fishing, watch television and debate about useless socio-political schemes. All these and other frivolous activities are included in the prajalpa category. And remember, Prabhupada wrote this almost 50 years ago. And could you imagine if Srila Prabhupada saw what was going on nowadays? In the 70s, there were no personal computers, there were no mobile phones, there were no iPads and iPods, there was no electronic social media of any kind, there was no Yahoo, no Instagram, no Skype, no Facebook, no Netflix, no Twitter, no Google. We're completely engulfed in mundane topics day in and day out. So a great obstacle these days. Of course, these things can be used in Krishna service, just like my talk that I'm giving at this very moment. We're using Google, we're using Facebook. They can be used. They have value. They can be used, but they're very easily misused, and our time will be taken away. And if we waste our time, that is a great obstacle on the path of spiritual life. And that brings us to obstacle number 4, which is an interesting one. Niyamagraha. Niyamagraha. This is practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. So 2 faults are being described here: not following the rules and obsessively following the rules. And they're both considered to be equally detrimental. Niyama means rules. So this obstacle is called niyamagraha. Niyamagraha. There are 2 slight differences. Niyama means the rules, because there's rules on the bhakti path, and agraha means negligent of them, and agraha with a long A means being obsessive about the rules. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in fact, writes in this connection, Niyama agraha ada niyama agraha dviprakara dosha e bhakta galagraha. The faults of both being negligent of rules and being obsessive about rules excuse me, are burdens to devotees. The word galagraha means a great burden. So Rupa Goswami first draws our attention to the fact that there are rules and regulations on the bhakti path. It is not a free-for-all. Not a free-for-all. It has to be conducted with great personal discipline. Our senses are like serpents, and they need to be watched very carefully. If you have a snake in your room or something like that, you can't be negligent. So our senses are like snakes. They can bite us at any time. So therefore, Prabhupada gave us the 4 rules and regulations: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling. These are the first 4 rules that we need to follow. But there are lesser rules. So we know what not following the rules means, but what does it mean to obsessively follow the rules? Or practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them? In Sanskrit, this is called Gadurika Pravaha Nyaya, the logic of the sheep. This logic indicates the tendency of people to follow the crowd. In a herd of sheep, one sheep follows the next, and if the first sheep falls into a ditch, they all fall into a ditch. So one has to know what the rules and regulations are for, and one has to know how and why we're following them and how to apply them. Prabhupada gave the example of a woman who was getting married. When she got married, everything was beautifully set up. The priests were sitting over there, the fire was blazing, all the utensils were present, marble floor was clean, there were baskets of flowers. Everything was set up beautifully for her wedding. And suddenly she noticed a cat came running into the sacrificial area. Now, in India, people don't allow cats and dogs in their houses. In the West, people sleep with their cats and dogs, eat with their cats and dogs. But according to the Vedic standard, this is a disgusting lifestyle, cats and dogs. Cats are God's creatures, of course. Cats have a purpose. But in India, people don't generally allow cats in the house. The cats are for scaring away the rats and the mice. And the dogs also, because these animals are not very clean. The dogs, of course, are very loyal, and they can bark and scare away enemies, but you don't bring them into the house necessarily. So she noticed a cat was running around, and she thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? There's a cat. It's going to pollute the whole cleansed arena of sacrifice. What to do? There's a wicker basket that had some flower garlands in it. She immediately took the basket and put it over the cat, and the cat was stuck inside. No time to take the cat outside, because I'm clean, I'm going to get married, I've been purified, the guests are all arriving. The wedding came and went, and everything was beautifully done. The daughter, later on, she got a daughter, and she noted, when she was looking at the video of her mother's wedding, of course I've added that little bit in the story because there was no video in the original story. But anyway, she noticed, oh mummy, what's that? And she said, oh, that's a cat. There's a cat hiding underneath a basket. It's a long story, darling. So anyway, when she got married, she got everything set up, and she included a cat in a basket because that's the way it's done. So that's an example, Prabhupada says, of following rules and regulations blindly without knowing that they're actually not rules and regulations at all, perhaps. So the moral of the story is that we may follow rules and regulations, but we may not exactly know what these rules and regulations are for, and we have a tendency to follow them blindly. I remember, this reminds me, I was brought up in a Jewish family, and our so-called Jewish life was defined very much by how well we appeared to be following the rules. We weren't following the rules at all. We were neglectful. We were not orthodox. We were not anything really. But according to social behavior, we had to pretend that we were. It's all like, it's all part of the game. And so one of the rules was that when you went to the synagogue, you couldn't drive your car because it's considered to be work, and you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. So everybody would walk to the synagogue. And on the rare occasions that we went to the synagogue, it would have meant that we would have had to walk up very steep hills, and it was in the middle of summer in Sydney, very difficult, and we all had our suits and formal gear. So my dad devised a plan that we would drive to the synagogue, we would take all the back roads, and we would sometimes pass members of the congregation who were walking up the hill, huffing and puffing in the blazing heat with their suits. And as soon as he saw someone, he would scream out to us, all the rest of the family in the back of the car, "Get down, get down, get down, get down, quick, quick. There's the rabbi, get down." And we would all get down and lie on the floor of the car. And he would sort of like turn his head away as he was driving so that we wouldn't be noticed. And that's a good example that comes to my memory of obsessively following the rules. We didn't even know what the rule was for, and we didn't care about it, but we wanted to make a show. Jai Swami writes in this connection in his book Vanity Karma, which he kindly gifted me recently, quote, "Scriptures and religious traditions prescribe all sorts of rules meant to keep one on the straight path, the path of ethical and spiritual conduct. These rules can help us live a pure life and spiritually advance. We should not, however, follow such rules so zealously that we thwart their ultimate purpose. The rules are meant to help us reach the goal. They are not the goal itself." And that brings us to obstacle number 5. Obstacle number 5 is Janasanga. This is a very important point, because, as I mentioned before, Rupa Goswami gives us a list of do's and don'ts. There are 6 things that we shouldn't do, and we're talking about them now. And there's also a list of 6 things that we should do, because that's the subject of another class. But in both of those lists, it mentions the power of association. In the list of things to do, it says one has to associate with saintly persons. And in the list of things not to do, and this is the point that we're speaking about now, Janasanga, don't associate with worldly-minded persons, people who are not saintly in character. We have to choose our association very carefully. The point is made, sometimes birds of a feather flock together. Or if you associate with a drunkard, if you have friends that drink, in other words, you may never drink, but if you associate with friends that do drink, you may become an alcoholic just by their company. So the company that we take defines us. So if we take on bad habits by bad association, we lose our taste for spiritual life. We become infected, if you like, contaminated, unempowered. So it's very important that we associate with spiritually elevated persons, people who are on the same wavelength, people who are also trying to make advancement in spiritual life. That makes our advancement all the more easy. Prabhupada compares our temples to chambers of commerce. He says that if you want to advance in the business world, you join a chamber of commerce or a stock exchange, and you get your business done very efficiently. He said, similarly, our temples and our associations of devotees are like spiritual stock exchanges or spiritual chambers of commerce, where you can get the best instructions, the best association, the best advice, and the best company. So Janasanga means hanging out with the wrong crowd, if you like. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has made a commentary on this Upadeshamrita. He mentions 6 kinds of bad association. You may say, well, what sort of people should we be avoiding? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati lists these 6 types of persons. Number 1, Atyanta Samagre Yara Sadachitadaya Atyahari Bhakti Hina Sei Samgyapaya. Those whose minds always run after excessive accumulation become known as Atyaharis or hoarders, and they are devoid of devotion. We should avoid their company. Number 2, Prakrita Vastura Asibogi Yaramana Prayasita Hara Nama Bhakti Hina Jana. Those whose minds desire to enjoy material objects and are known as prayasis or over-endeavourers, devoid of devotion. Their association should be avoided. Who else should we avoid? Krishna Kata Chadi Jiva Anakata Kahe Prajalpitanra Nama Byata Brita Vakya Vahe. Those whose tongues avoid discussing Krishna and who speak about other subjects are known as prajalpis, those who speak nonsense. Of course, these these categories are part of the categories of the previous obstacles that we've just been discussing. We should avoid those people. Bhajaneti udasina karmeti pravina bhavarambi se niyamagrihi attidina. Number 4, exhibitionists who are indifferent to service and expert in material affairs are known as niyamagrihis, or transgressors of the rules, and their association should be avoided. And number 5, Krishna Bhakta Sangha Vina Anya Sangirata Janasangi Kuvishaya Vilasi Vivrata. Those who avoid the association of Krishna's devotees and associate with others are known as Janasangis, or fraternizers, or those intent upon indecent material enjoyment. And number 6, Nanastani Brahmidye Nijaswartatari Lolyapada Bhaktihina Samge Dayanari. Number 6, those people who wander here and there for their own purposes are known as Lolyaparas, fickle-minded persons who are devoid of devotion. They should be avoided. Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada mentions in this connection, H chai nahe kabu bhakti adhikari bhakti hina laksha brashta bishayi sangsari. These 6 types of people are never qualified for devotion. They're worldly, materialistic, misdirected, and devoid of devotion, and those persons should be avoided. So that's Janasanga. We should avoid persons who are not favorably disposed to our advancement on the path of devotional service. And obstacle number 6 in today's talk is known as lolyam, or greed. In most of the world's religions, greed is acknowledged as being counterproductive to devotion. In the Bible it is said, for instance, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And elsewhere in the Bible it is said, thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God, unquote. Modern materialistic life is very much, and politics of course, is very much based upon greed. Apparently, arch-materialist Gordon Gekko was quoted as saying that greed is good. Of course, greed is not good. In fact, it's a huge impediment in the path of spiritual life especially. It inflames the senses and makes the mind disturbed and agitated. Srila Prabhupada told us that one of the 4 regulative principles that we should avoid is no gambling, because gambling and greed are very much connected. You gamble because you want to make a large amount of material wealth in a great hurry, and you engage in all sorts of gambling activities which inflames the senses. You become very angry and disappointed, and it's very much an agitation and a disturbance to the mind, and when your mind is disturbed you can't focus at all on spiritual life. Prabhupada gives a very interesting story in the connection. In this connection, he mentions it actually in the purport to this verse. In the Nectar of Instruction, he writes that if a $100 bill is lying on the street, someone may pick it up and put it in his pocket. Such a person is not honest. Just say you're walking down the street and someone is fiddling around with his pocket, and out of his pocket falls a $100 bill, 100 euros, whatever, falls onto the ground. There's a person walking behind him. What does he do? Well, he's got a choice. He's got 3 choices. He chooses to pick it up. He looks around quickly, no one's looking. The man hasn't noticed that he's dropped the note. He quickly bends over, slides into his pocket, and it's his. Such a man is not honest, because obviously the money doesn't belong to him. Another man may be walking down the street, he sees someone drop a $100 bill and he decides that he should just leave it there. Well, I'm not going to get involved, it's not my money. And he just keeps walking, because you shouldn't touch another person's property. But he doesn't go as far as to return it to the person, he just doesn't get involved, walks away. Although this second man doesn't steal the money for his own purposes, he's unaware of its proper use. The third person, he picks up the money, and then he chases after the man that's just dropped it, and he says, excuse me, sir. And the man turns around, you just dropped this $100 bill. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So that's the third type of person. He takes it, picks it up, delivers it to the person who lost it, and this man is not only honest, but wise as well. So that's the example that Prabhupada gives. And what has this got to do with greed, you may say? Well, the wealth of the world, Prabhupada explains elsewhere in the Upanishad, should be used for the welfare of all living entities. That is the plan of Mother Nature. Everyone has the right to live, he says, by utilizing the wealth of the world. When people learn the art of scientifically utilizing the Lord's property, they will no longer encroach upon one another's rights. Then an ideal society can be formed. The basic principle for such spiritual society is called the Isavasya society, which is based on the first mantra of the Upanishad. Isavasyamidang sarvam yat kincha jagat yam jagat tena chaktena bunchita magridaha kasyasviddanam. And that means that everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. And if we follow that principle of a God-centered society and using everything in the service of Krishna, this will counter the tendency of becoming greedy, which is another obstacle, the sixth and final obstacle in today's list of 6 things which spoil our devotional life. So, summing up today's presentation, we spoke about 6 obstacles on the path of devotional service. Atyahara, eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than necessary. Prayasa, over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. We spoke about prajalpa, the debilitating habit of talking about mundane subject matters, which snatch away our enthusiasm for spiritual life. We spoke about number 4, niyamagraha, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or niyamagraha, completely rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. The 5th obstacle on the path of devotional service is janasanga, which means bad association, associating with worldly-minded persons who were not interested in Krishna consciousness. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur described 6 varieties of janasanga: the hoarders, those that over-endeavor for mundane achievements, those who talk nonsense, low-class sense enjoyers. These sense enjoyers, in fact, he describes, may even present themselves as being devotees, but they engage in lusty affairs. We should avoid their association. Those people that are masquerading as devotees, in fact, transgressors of the rules of bhakti outright, and fickle-minded practitioners of bhakti that have no devotion. So they're the 6 types of persons we should avoid. That's bad association. And number 6, we spoke about greed. Don't be greedy. This will detrimentally affect your spiritual life. So these are the 6 obstacles. It might seem sometimes to be a bit of a struggle in spiritual life to get it right. Sometimes we slip. Sometimes we slip and slide all over the place. Obstacles, of course, and problems are an impetus for us to do better. It is said that a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. So, in fact, these problems can be an impetus for us to do better, and they can strengthen us. I'd like to leave you with one of my favorite prayers. When I was a pujari, I learnt this prayer. Sometimes one has to avoid offenses in the deity worship. So there are certain prayers that one can chant to the deity afterwards, after engaging in a morning program of worship, to forgive us for our offenses. This is a very nice prayer that I learned. Bhumo skalitapadanam, bhumireva avalambanam, twai jataparadhanam, tvam eva sharanam Prabhu. The translation of this verse is, Just as the ground is the only support for those whose feet have slipped, so also you alone, my dear Lord Krishna, are the only shelter, even for those who have committed offences to you. So finally, let's keep the company of advanced devotees. This is the secret. Those whose only shelter is Lord Krishna, specifically the association offered here in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, even by virtual sadhu sangha, so we can become empowered, protected, inspired, blessed, etc., to complete the journey back to home, back to Godhead, and ultimately our only shelter and the only panacea for all the ills of this very degraded and confused age is the chanting of the great mantra for deliverance. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So thank you very much.